Well, I am John Olsen, and I am going to tell you about short story preparation and submission. This is part of the LDS Beta Readers 2018 online conference. And so you've plowed through some short story and you have typed the end on it, and now you need to know, okay, what's next? That's what we're here to talk about. So let me get going here. I need to arrange some of the screens that you can't see so that I can get going. All right, here is a little bit about me and why I am doing this presentation. I have sold 2 novels. One of them's already out. It's Crystal King. The sequel to that is in editing right now. I've got, actually, this screen is wrong. I have 14 short stories that have been sold as of yesterday. 1 poem and counting. There on the screen you can see some of the anthologies and things that I am a part of. I have lots of experience with both the local and non-local anthologies getting short stories published. There's one that I've got that's out on a web portal. I've presented at lots of different conferences, including the League of Utah Writers Spring and Fall conferences, LTUE, Salt Lake Comic Convention, Snake River Comic Convention, and if you go back a little ways, Salt City Steamfest and Conduit. So that's where I am coming from. So let's get into it. Okay, you have written the end. What is the next thing that you think you ought to get going on? If you haven't finished a short story yet, be sure to sit in on some motivational and writing presentations. I'm sure there's a lot to choose from, even just on this mini conference that the LDS Beta Readers are putting on. There's a lot of good information out there on this. But let's just assume you have a short story that's done, and then we'll be on our way talking about it. Why is it that you write? Because that really does play into this decision. There are lots of different reasons. I have some of them listed here. You want to learn new skills. You have an unquenchable burning desire to write. There are some people that they write because they feel there is no choice except to write. Some people want specifically to get published. Others want to sell their stories, turn it into a career, something that they can make some money at. So there are lots of different reasons, but it turns out that most of those reasons, your next step may actually be pretty close to the same. But let's just assume you want to get published, so we'll go through that avenue. One of the things that I discovered is I think I've got probably about an hour's worth of material here, so I may end up rushing just a little bit to get through everything. So we'll try to squeeze things enough that there's a little bit of time for questions at the end if you happen to have something that you want to ask. One of the first things that you need to do with a short story that you've finished is get it polished up before you send it anywhere. There are lots and lots of tools that you can use for this. The standard word processor that lots and lots of publishers will expect things to be formatted with is Microsoft Word. It has grammar and spelling checkers in there. They are not the most advanced that you'll find anywhere, but they do work. There's also Scrivener as a tool that a lot of authors have started using. It also has some rudimentary spelling checks and things like that in it. Then you get into some of the more interesting online tools. I wanted to show some of these to you very briefly as well. There's one called Hemingway. Let me bring that up here. If I show you this over here, this is an example of the startup screen on Hemingway. It's just an online application. You can paste your text into it and it will analyze it for you and tell you about it. One thing to be really careful of with all of these tools, whether they're online or something that you buy, sometimes they will lie to you. You have to be aware that their idea of good grammar is based on rules, and not all of the rules will ever fit in the software. So you have to be a little bit careful. You have to know the rules of grammar and all that yourself to be able to tell when to pay attention to it and when to ignore it. So this is just an example of what the Hemingway screen looks like. It highlights things and color codes them. You can see over here at the side what the different color codes mean. And so there's an awful lot there that you can do to get a better idea of where you're going with your writing, things that you may need to work on. Also, Grammarly and Pro Writing Aid, those are also some tools that we can look at really quickly. Grammarly I've also got here, so you can just bring up individual stories here. I've got a short story I can pop open, and it will also do an analysis, and it'll color code things throughout the document as well. There are lots of different things that you can do with these online tools. Some of them are easier to use than others. One of the things I like about Pro Writing Aid, let me back up on that. Pro Writing Aid here, it has more detailed information, but the interface, I don't like it quite as much. It's a little more difficult to use. But all of these tools can help with grammar and spelling if you already have a good foundation to know when these tools are actually correct. Another interesting thing on polishing, I wanted to bring up the idea of emotion. There were some scholarly types at a university who did what they called the hedonometer study. And that was where they assigned words a level of emotion from positive to negative, and then they started analyzing writing with those things. Let me bring up a web page that talks a little bit about that. The reason I'm popping these up here without really describing them is you should be able to go in at full resolution and read these URLs, then you can find them yourselves. But this is just an example of one of the pages of words that it will scan through and find. So you have laughter, happiness, love. All of these words are positive emotions. If you go clear to the end of the list, then it will show you all of the negative words down here at the bottom: terrorist, suicide, rape, terrorism, murder, death, all of these things. And so they go through and build charts of writing based on those things. And I didn't have access to their software, so being the software geek that I am, I wrote my own. And so this is an example of one of the charts that I can bring up with the software that I wrote that'll show me the emotional level of a story. This is just one chapter out of my novel that's in editing right now. So you can see we have a higher state here, and it goes down into the negative emotions, then it goes back up and back down. And so you have the seesaw of emotions, which is really one of those things that you want to look for in a story. So there are lots of different ways that you can analyze things. People aren't going to have access to this software, but it's something that you can pay attention to just as you are writing, using those positive words versus negative words to help polish not just the text of the story, but the tone of the story. So that's one of those things that, being a software engineer, things bug me until I decide, okay, I'm going to make this work, and then I figure out how to go through and build a system that does what I want. Okay, now the next level of polish is where you start involving other people. There are a lot of different things you can do here with critique groups. Well, let's see, Carolyn, it looks like. I can set up a link to that software. I can post some information on that in the notes later. And so it's something that it's not really polished and easily usable, but if you're willing to put up with a couple of quirks, then I can make that available for people to tinker around with. But for online critique groups, there are several that you can have to choose from. Two that I have actually used are Critters and Scribophile. I don't have the link to Critters up handy, but I do have Scribophile here. This is an interesting site where as you critique other people, you gain points, and you can spend those points to post your own material to have other people critique. And so it works out really well to get a lot of feedback from others. I haven't been terribly active on that site lately, though. Oh, yeah. One thing that Carol is mentioning here is, yeah, you really don't say, boy, I'm happy to flag those words. But it really does work out because you tend, in your emotional showing and body language, those words are also flagged emotionally. So you can tell, okay, these are the kinds of things that give a positive response. These are the things that give a negative response. This is just commenting back on that emotional graphing information. So Scribophile, that's one of the things that you can use for doing online. Local critique groups. There are critique groups everywhere. It's just a matter of finding them and then finding if you are comfortable with that group. A lot of these can be through local writing groups, chapters of the League of Utah Writers, for instance, different things like that. But you can also take stories to workshops, just getting together and as a team going over and reviewing information, kind of like the critique groups. Then another one here is family and friends, although you do have to take this one with a significant grain of salt. You ask your mom, what do you think of my story? Of course she's going to say, it's the best thing ever, unless your mother happens to be a really good professional editor and then you trust her to give you that opinion. One of my friends, that's the case. She gives her story to her mother, and yes, she will get an honest opinion on any problems with the story rather than just the family, I love you and I'm not going to say anything bad about you. So yeah, family and friends can be useful, but there are some limits there depending on the skill sets involved with your family and how much they worry about hurting your feelings. The last thing I have on the list here is editors. And some people will have an editor look over their short stories. That's usually reserved for novels. But another one of my friends had taken one of his short stories and given it a full editing pass with a professional, and then he had sent it off to the Writers of the Future contest. And I believe he ended up getting an honorable mention for that story. And so it's something that you can work out. It can get a little bit expensive if you want to edit your stories because the cost of editing is likely to exceed the cost of selling that story anywhere. So something you have to be a little bit careful of. If you happen to have friends that will give it a quick look for you because they're good people and you're not obnoxious about it, yeah, go ahead. That works too. Okay, after the polished people, oh, there was another comment here. Let me get back to this. Yeah, Carol's got another idea here using the LDS beta readers or to critique or beta read. Yeah, so that's just a sister group to the LDS beta readers. Getting people involved in that to critique the information really is good. The beta reading is particularly nice because people are expecting it to not be that polished story. So it's not like you're sending them arcs. So they will be a little bit more forgiving of the things that need comments and corrections. And so that works out really well. And so if you want to just follow along in the comments there, it looks like there's a little bit more back and forth on that, talking about how good the LDS beta readers group is. I've picked up some beta readers from there as well, and the feedback has been really good. So that's a wonderful option. Yeah, sorry, I'd forgotten to mention that in the other information. Okay, so with the polish information, once you're done with all of the people editing and the workshopping and online, whatever else, formatting is a big deal with short stories. But why does formatting matter? That's an interesting question. I was talking to an editor, and she said back in the days when she had paper submissions, she would get an envelope. She would open it, and she would start pulling the story out. First thing she would check for is top of the story, do they have contact information and a word count? If they do, she keeps pulling it out farther. If they have a story and a name, she keeps pulling it out further. Then she reads the first paragraph and decides if she's going to pull the thing all the way out and actually read it. Do they have the margins set? One of the things you have to be aware of is that editors are quite often looking for a way to cut down their slush pile, and if you haven't followed their formatting rules, that's an easy reject. They'll just say, they don't follow instructions, send them a rejection letter and I'll go on to the next story. And so it really is a big deal that you follow whatever their formatting requirements are. And so how do you format it? Right here, exactly like they tell you to. Most places will give you a good example of how they want things to be formatted. They'll tell you either the margins they want and the fonts that they want, different things like that, or they will refer you to some of the standardized formats that other people have specified. So let me go back here. So fonts, margin, line spacing, headers, all of those are really common things that they should either specify or tell you doesn't really matter to them. Now, some places will just take whatever you submit and they'll reformat it the way they want to be able to read it. Some of the places that publish online tend to be a little bit more forgiving about that. But one of the examples that's used fairly regularly is this shun example here, and I actually have that in my web browser. William Shun. He actually wrote this several years ago, and his example of how to do formatting is an example of a properly formatted presentation. So that's a little bit meta there, where it's kind of the inception idea where he's talking about something. And so you can see here he has his contact information up in the corner. He has something here that if you're an active member of SFWA, some other thing that applies to the story, yeah, go ahead and put it on the contact information. The word count, the title and author name, and then if you look here on the second page, this is fairly common to have name, story name, and page number starting on the second page. Things like this. If you understand Word enough to do those sorts of things, then it will step you past that first filter level where they look at it and say, yeah, did they follow my instructions? Well, if they didn't, I'll maybe read that later. So that's something that you really need to be careful of, to follow those as closely as you can. Let's see, we have a little over 10 minutes left. I think we are doing just fine on time. Oh, no problem with asking the extra questions there. If people can comment to answer them, that's great. Otherwise, I will try to get through and check on the questions again as we get closer to the end, because sometimes I get involved in the rest of the things and I don't check my notes. So I'll try to keep up on that. So how do I learn where to send my story? I've heard people complaining about not knowing, okay, I've got this story, what do I do with it? How do I get in contact with editors? There are lots of different things you can do. One of them is to search Facebook groups like I've got mentioned here. There are places that will post open calls for stories. There's one particular Facebook group called Science Fiction, Fantasy, and Pulp Markets. They will regularly post things there. League of Utah Writers, there are different ways of getting information there. There are the contests that they hold, that contests that other places hold. There's even one of the chapters that's putting together an anthology right now. One of the easiest things to use, though, is the second item on my list here, the submission grinder. This is a wonderful resource. I'm going to bring that one up on my web browser here and show it to you a little bit. This tracks your own stories if you happen to sign up for a free subscription, and then you can query it. So right here I can tell it I want to run a search for places that are looking for a story that's got this word count, and you can just have it find all of those different possible sites. If I do my search here, it will come through and it will respond back with a list of places that I can submit that size and kind of story to. You can see right here is a list of possible markets. So this is just a wonderful resource that you can look through to find places to submit your stories. Each of those links goes back to the website of the place that you can submit it to, and it'll show their guidelines. It'll show the stories that they are interested in. Quite often some of them will have stories that they have published that you can compare against to see if your style matches what they are looking for. There are a lot of different things that you can do there. Let me catch up on a couple of comments here. So S. Heller is saying if your work isn't right, and so let's see. I try to find others to submit once again when you're ready. Yeah, one of the things you can do here is some places will give you more feedback than just rejecting your story. That's generally one of the ways of telling that you're getting it about right, but you aren't quite meeting what they happen to need at the time. Sometimes a rejection will come back because, well, they only have room for 6,000 words and you gave them 7,000. That one really isn't something that you can do by fixing a story. It's just something you do by finding another market and recycling and sending it back off as soon as you hear back. So that's one of the important things with sending your story out is when it comes back, and all of us are going to receive rejections, just turn it around and send it back out to the next place. Last year, I had a goal where I wanted to receive 30 short story rejections. I'd set that goal that way instead of for acceptances because it helped turn that negative thing of receiving a rejection into a scoring mechanism for me. So I kept a nice tally, and I was sitting at 39 rejections, or at 29 rejections, one shy of my goal. And I saw an email come in, and I thought, oh, great, this is going to push me over. I'm going to reach my goal of 30 rejections. It was from a publisher saying that they were just holding on to my story for another month, and it wasn't a rejection or an acceptance. So, okay, well, I'll have to wait till the next email. So it gave me a much more positive attitude when I was keeping that score than if I just kept getting rejections and thinking, oh, okay, I have to send it out again. It gave me a positive thing to look forward to, whether it was an exception or an acceptance or a rejection. So I had a lot of fun with that. Okay, one other thing here, right on the bottom of my list, I've got networking at writing events. Ask around, find out where other people are submitting things. This is how I ended up getting invited into an anthology or two. Is I was talking to people and mentioned that I was looking, and they said, oh yeah, I've got this thing we're putting together. Informal lunches are great as well. We've got writer lunches, Alley Cross and some friends get together, the IHOP cons that Dave Butler puts together. These are great opportunities to just get together and talk with people and share ideas and look for ways that you can get your stories out there. One other one that's really cool here is go to bookstores and libraries and look for anthologies and the publishers that are putting things out. Because if you can get a story accepted by one of those, that's a way of getting your stories into those same libraries and bookstores. It's one that a lot of people overlook because it's a little different way of approaching it to find those possible publishers to work with. Okay, now, things you didn't know that you needed. One thing about paying to be in anthologies, do not. That's my advice there. If somebody wants to pay you for your story, that's the way the money should be flowing. If you have to pay to become part of something, the only things that you should be paying for as an author would be editing, cover work, marketing, things like that. There are a lot of places that will very willingly take your money and give you not much in return. So you really have to be careful of those sorts of things. There are some contests, though, that will have a submission fee, and some of those are really good. Some of those are also kind of scammy, and so you have to base things on reputation for those sorts of things. So that's something just to be aware of there. But back to things you didn't know that you needed. Write an author bio. An easy way to do that is to look through a lot of author bios in the front fronts or backs of novels, things like that. You can get an idea for the kinds of things people are putting in as their author bio. You want to get a headshot portrait, something that has enough room that it can be cropped so that you make it tall and skinny or short and wide. Just a good picture that can be used as your headshot portrait for promotional materials. Those work best if you can get one professionally taken. Otherwise, if you've got a friend that you trust with a camera, I've seen a lot of informal shots that weren't done professionally but actually turned out really well. So just something that you need to be aware of that you will need eventually. Next one on that list is previous publications that you, if you have them. Some places will ask for that, others don't care. But it's nice to have that list. And one thing that I've found is it's nice to have title, publisher, and a little blurb from it in case I need to use it for some other promotional purpose. So I can give a short synopsis of those stories. The next thing is a list of expertise. So are you a phrenologist? Do you understand how to analyze head bumps? If you're doing something and you have some background in anything that relates to the story, whether you've studied anatomy of unicorns, whatever. It doesn't have to be real science, but it has to be an area that you have some expertise in. If it applies to the story, be sure to mention it when you're submitting something. All the sciences, hobbies, anything else that really does apply, call it out, let them know this is an area that I have interest in. I think it's a lot of fun. I'm writing stories that include this so that I can make them a little more detailed and add a lot of color and flavor to those stories. Oh, yeah, another thing from Carol here. Getting published in a free anthology is a good way to build up creds. That is definitely true. I have some stories that I have effectively donated to some anthologies just because I liked the cause that they were promoting. I have a story that's going to be in the next Life, the Universe, and Everything anthology that's being done as a fundraiser, and so that's one that I knew I'm not going to get paid for, but I did want to participate just because it's a cause that I thought was worth supporting. There are a couple others that I haven't been paid for. Those are things that you have to analyze. Is it going to be worth my time and effort to support these other groups, or is this something that I want to spend more of my time looking for paying markets? Some of that also depends on where you are in your career. If you really are looking for that extra name recognition and publication credits, or if you're out trying to help make your car payment. So it's something that it varies from person to person. Back to the expertise. I think we've just about covered that, and I have a couple of minutes left. Submission methods. Most use online forms. Some will use email, but every one of them will have instructions, and you must follow their instructions. It goes back to formatting. It's the same thing. Do it exactly the way they instruct you to, and things will work out better for you, and you're a lot more likely to make a positive impression there. Then tracking your work. I just need to blow through a couple more slides here really quickly before our time is up. It's your job to know what you've written, where you have sent it, and what their response was. This is something I keep track of on a big spreadsheet. I can track how many places I've submitted it to, all the different things that I have done with it. If I happen to have sold it, I also track when those rights revert to me so that I can start shopping that around as a reprint. And so all of that information, nobody else is going to track that for you. And so it's really important for you to take care of that. Submission Grinder will help you track short story submissions, but it won't show all markets. And so I use that as kind of a backup instead of as my primary source of information. So I use my spreadsheets for that. Just in conclusion, questions and answers. I'm going to go through and see if we have some nice comments in the last couple of minutes that we have here. Here's all of my contact information to where you can get to my blog, an email address, Facebook, Twitter, my Amazon author page, all of those things. So I think with that I will look through the last comments here. If you have anything, chime in now and I will see what I can comment on there. One thing is, will they decline publishing you if you query them too many times. I have not found that to be the case. A lot of them will specify right in their descriptions of what they want. They will say, if we already have one of your stories, don't send in another until you hear a response back. So that's something that you can check to see if they have particular rules like that. Some will have something where they say, we only want to hear something from you once in this amount of time. So yeah, you just need to follow whatever their guidelines are on that. A couple other comments in there. It looks like people are answering everybody else's questions, so that's going to be great there. Another thing, yeah, with the photos, they help make a more personal connection. One thing you need to do, I have never bothered to submit a photo with anything until they ask for it for promotional material or to put in after an acceptance. There may be other places where they are interested in that, but I have not found any where they have a real use for that information before having an acceptance for a short story. So I think with that, we are out of time. So if you have any other questions, you can reach me on the emails or the various websites that I have listed here, and I would love to hear from you. I will also keep an eye on the comments for a little while to see if we have addressed everybody's concerns there. So thanks a lot, and I will see you around.